It's just like they always say. You can't judge a book by its cover.
Hoodwinked. Oh, I've been waiting to review this movie for so long! This might sound like a major statement, but I think Hoodwinked is one of the most fascinating animated films from the 2000 decade. Now, imagine yourself at the start of 2006. Computer graphics were still considered the hot new medium for animated films thanks to Pixar and DreamWorks dominating the industry. But suddenly, a little movie by the name of Hoodwinked appeared in theaters, and at first glance, many people thought to themselves, "What the fridge is this garbage? Seriously, who decided that releasing this cheap Shrek knockoff on the big screen was a good idea?"
Awkward.
However, when people got to see the film for themselves, they realized that there was so much more to this than what they would expect from its low-budgeted exterior. And from there, word of mouth turned this unlikely little movie into a big box office hit with a significant following. Maybe it never reached Shrek levels of fame, but Hoodwinked was a real underdog story of an independent feature getting the chance of a lifetime to become a Hollywood star in its own right. And that's only part of the reason why this movie is so interesting to me. In fact, longtime viewers may recall that I've talked about Hoodwinked a few times in the past. I chronicled the movie's history from its challenges of being made with a tiny budget to the rise and fall of its popularity, and I also reviewed the sequel, Hoodwinked 2: Hood vs. Evil, back in 2011. And I remember how it was different from its predecessor, by being the horrible Shrek ripoff that people expected the first to be. But now that I've discussed about its history and slammed Hood vs. Evil as one of the worst animated sequels ever made, there's only one more video for me to make about Hoodwinked, a review of the original. So now that it's time that we investigate this movie, will we discover how it was once a legend amongst fairy tale parodies? Or did my memory deceive me and it's actually as ugly as its animation? Let's find out. The story. Unlike your typical mainstream animated feature, Hoodwinked decided to try something different with its storytelling by going in a non-linear direction. The movie takes the classic tale of Little Red Riding Hood and turns it into a crime comedy where each of the main characters tell their side of what happened during the incident when Red encountered the wolf disguised as her grandma, all while a mysterious criminal by the name of the Goody Bandit is stealing recipes and forces baking shops across the forest to close down. And their biggest target thereafter is Granny's business.
We've got 4 suspects, and that means 4 stories. And if you get people talking long enough, someone will spill the beans.
Beans?
While this is easily identifiable as a fairy tale parody, being one is not necessarily its main priority. Unlike films such as Shrek or Happily Never After, who are all about making fun of tropes in those classic stories, that aspect is more just to establish the film's setting. Also, the only fairy tale that is featured here is Red Riding Hood. At the most, there are others who only get mentioned as part of a joke.
3 years ago, on the Stiltskin case, you were snooping around for a lead on his real name.
That was close, too. I was gonna go with Greg.
Instead of going all in on being a parody, it focuses on developing its intertwining storytelling, where it has a base story, but have it be told through the perspective of several characters telling their interpretation of what happened and what they went through, along with adding a mystery element where the police are trying to figure out who is the Goody Bandit. And with each side presented, they gradually unravel elements that make the movie increasingly engaging, highlighting the characters' personalities, show the dynamic between one another, reveal a part of how the film's opening happened, and be a step closer to the culprit who's been stealing recipes. In a way, its storytelling is a lot like building a puzzle. It doesn't follow any particular order, but when those pieces start coming together, it gives out that sense of satisfaction of being more familiar with the big picture and the details that are within to grasp a full understanding of the actual story.
Remember, Ted, pieces of a puzzle make funny shapes, but they still fit together in the end.
Boy, you're just full of those, aren't you?
It's quite a clever tactic to get audiences engaged. With the way that the perspectives overlap each other, it makes the viewer pay closer attention to the events and let them make the connections for themselves so that they feel like they could be a part of the investigation. But of course, while uncovering a mystery plays a key role in Hoodwinked, the main genre that this movie is categorized in is comedy. And on that aspect, I'm ready to say a bold take and consider this as one of the greatest animated comedies. When making the feature, director Corey Edwards wanted to deviate from Shrek's snarky and cynical humor and go with a style that is more enjoyable for all ages. He cited many inspirations like The Muppets and The Simpsons, but the most obvious source of the jokes is from the Looney Tunes. And as crazy as this sounds, I think this is the closest that a modern animated film successfully reproduced the comedic style of Tex Avery, matching that perfect sense of timing and unpredictability on the delivery, the sharp wit given to some of the characters to add humor to their remarks, and that sense of self-awareness that it's a cartoon so that it doesn't limit itself to any laws of physics.
Okay, not cool.
But then there's the musical aspect. I've seen some say that this is a musical since there are moments when the cast put on a song and dance number. And I do get that perspective, but I don't know if I can actually count this as a musical. Since its priority is on the storytelling and the comedy, it doesn't leave much room for the movie to have impactful musical numbers, especially when only a few characters actually sing. Some of them are just in the background for montages, and there are times when the attention is away from the numbers to get back into the story. Not to mention that the songs themselves are among the least memorable elements of the picture. The only exception, however, is Be Prepared. That song slaps, and along with Benji Gaither's performance, they're the reasons why many consider the GOAT to be the movie's breakout character.
Be prepared, and unless you got a spare, you got one life, so handle it with care.
The story proves that Hoodwinked is not like the other fairy tale parodies because it's not about being a parody. It prioritizes on developing a mystery narrative while also delivering excellent comedy. When the movie sets its focus on something, it makes sure that they can be at their best to provide the most enjoyment out of the experience. The animation. Unfortunately, this is the part where I'll have to take a break from being nice to the movie, because as much as I really like Hoodwinked, its animation is terrible. However, there is a clear reason as to why. One of the unique traits of Hoodwinked is that it had a budget of less than $8 million. Producing an entire animated feature with only that amount of money is considered to be insane. This explains how many of the film's creative decisions were often based on cost-saving tactics, such as keeping the details of the environment to a minimum so that the backgrounds are basic, and give the characters a simpler design. To which Corey Edwards stated that they were based on the stop-motion Rankin-Bass specials so that the feature could also evoke a nostalgic look to complement its whimsical setting.
No more spoons, use your hands!
Says a friendly Shih Tzu man.
Make sure you keep an extra one for later in your later hosa.
I don't know which Rankin-Bass specials he was talking about, but if they look anything like this, I'd be too scared to find out. Of course, small budgets are generally not the cause of bad animation, since there are many movies who prove that the opposite can be true, where they were produced at a low cost, but were still able to create some beautiful visuals. With Hoodwinked, however, I find it's impossible to not look at the budget as the source of all the animation's problems. This probably wouldn't be an issue if the team worked within its limitations, but the visual's ultimate downfall is that it wants to do so much more than what it could afford, thus highlighting what it lacks in quality. One example is with the character animation, where they remind me of animatronics with the way that they have to keep the movements of their joints to a minimum without them looking too stiff. And if they tried to do anything that feels more fluid or dynamic, the system would just blow up for trying too hard.
Recipes have been coming up missing all over the forest. Goodie shops have been going out of business for months, and the trail ends here.
On top of that, the issue also affected the other elements of the animation. This includes how the 3D models were built, where not everything has a texture, and those that do make the designs look weird, the lighting doesn't reflect on them naturally, and hair can sometimes look like overgrown skin with lines. I mean, why does Kirk have a mutated chin with orange veins coming out of it? And then there is also the cinematography, where it wants to try some elaborate techniques to enhance the immersion of the experience, like emulating shots from a handheld camera, but the execution generally gets pretty clunky. And when it comes to the effects, particularly during the action scenes, they can be mixed, where some like the avalanche and the snow are decent, and others just don't even try.
You can't hold on to those recipes forever! I'll get you and your little granny, too!
At this point, the animation sounds like one of those things that is completely hopeless in this movie, and for the most part, it kind of is. However, that doesn't mean that I don't have anything positive to say about it. One thing I'll give the movie is that the character designs are fine. They're not great, and they certainly don't look like something from a stop-motion Rankin-Bass special, not to mention that some of the animals look unsettling, but they're not the worst-looking designs I've seen in a movie either, and they serve their purpose for this cartoon update of the fairy tale. That, and the directing is able to salvage the function of the scenes. As much as the budget can heavily hold this movie back visually, there are some things that it couldn't touch to allow the execution to work. In the case of the comedy, there is a good amount that is physically based, like slapstick, and even with this animation, it's thanks to the timing that allows the jokes to land well. The same can be said with the action scenes. Sure, the execution does leave some room for improvement, but they still have some good concepts behind them to admire their creativity, and the fast pace does maintain the scene's intensity so that they can be engaging. At best, the movie tried to be a fun animated adventure, and it does provide some good ideas to back it up. However, that still doesn't change that it bites off a lot more than it could chew, which consequently puts a spotlight on its small budget as the film's detriment. The animation is undeniably bad, but I guess they got what they paid for. The characters. Now that I got my biggest criticism out of the way, let's get back into the good stuff and another reason why Hoodwinked is a fan-favorite movie, which is how it created its own version of the Red Riding Hood characters, along with adding some new ones for that extra spice to this updated tale. As it is known to have an all-star cast, it's worth noting that prior to being picked up by the Weinstein Company, the actors featured in the film were a little different. There was Tara Strong, who was supposed to be Red.
Whoa, what big hands you have. What big ears you have. What bad breath you have.
Sally Struthers as Granny.
Listen, Munchkin, if there's two things your granny doesn't do, it's lie and play extreme sports.
Joel McCarthy as Chief Grizzly, and one of the screenwriters, Tony Leach, as Bill Stork.
This guy's a loon.
Watch it, Chief. My mother's half loon.
David Ogden Stiers as Kirk, along with his role as Nicky Flippers.
You didn't jump through the river, you were pushed, yes, by a tree, yes.
And Tom Kenny as Woolworth. But of course, it then got the Hollywood treatment, and changes were made to bring in people like Anne Hathaway, Glenn Close, Jim Belushi, Anthony Anderson, Exhibit, and Chaz Palminteri. Don't worry though, some like Strong and Kenny were still able to keep their voices in the film as different characters, and Stiers still kept his part as Nicky Flippers.
Hey G, you checking the hardcore European team over there? Those guys put the Sabretooth brothers in the hospital yesterday.
Say, Tommy, you lose some weight?
No.
Didn't think so.
The reason why I bring this up is because the movie already had a talented cast that set a high standard for the characters. And with the updated celebrity lineup, they were not only able to get to their level, but they also made the voice acting one of the movie's strongest elements. They brought in so much charisma to their performances that they really make their personality shine to show that extra layer of who they are that's not been told in the fairy tale.
Grandma, I can read. It says Battle of the Iron Cage Gladiators.
And as we look into our suspects, we start off with Red, who works for her grandma and wants to ensure that her recipes are safe while the bandit is on the loose. She also yearns for independence to prove that she is no longer a kid, which gives her that Disney-like heart to show her struggle between her family and living her own life.
I'd fly all the way past that mountain, but I can't. I'm just a kid.
And speaking of her grandma, Granny lives a double life where she's a famous baker with her own popular brand and secretly an adrenaline junkie who is a top player in extreme sports. It's kind of weird how this is more like an open secret that almost everyone in the forest already knows about her double life, but I guess as long as Red doesn't know and she's not the kind who reads the news, I guess it still counts as a secret.
I have to go now. My program's on. Kisses. Time to shred some powder.
Then there is Wolf, and I must say that as much as I love Patrick Warburton as Joe and Kronk, Wolf is the most underrated character that he voiced. He's an investigative journalist who is independently looking into the Goody Bandit case, and is the movie's primary comic relief with his quick wit and deadpan delivery. This is very different from Warburton's other characters, but he pulled off an amazing performance that results in Wolf to have a lot of the movie's best moments.
So, can we eat?
Sure. You hungry for failure? Maybe a side of unemployment? Because that's what's for lunch.
And alongside him is Twitchy, his hyperactive squirrel sidekick who supplies a lot of the tech-savory cartooniness. And as crazy as he can be, the movie handles him very well to make him a great contrast to Wolf to form this dynamic comedic duo.
Hey, what are you looking?
God is my witness, you will learn to speak. Look, a way out.
Then you have Kirk, who I guess is the red herring of the picture because his connection to the events of the film is minimal. Then again, it is fun to see his plotline as the clueless actor trying to get into the role of the woodsman for a commercial.
Come back in?
It's a callback.
I had always heard about callbacks, but I had never gotten one.
But the one who is trying to put the pieces together is Nicky Flippers, the cool and collected detective who interrogates the suspects and presented as the man who could do the job in contrast to the police who each have their quirky setbacks.
Nicky Flippers, what are you doing here? This is my case.
Well, someone hibernated on the wrong side of the cave.
What's great about these characters is that they each offer something that makes the experience more fun, especially during the climax where they use their unique traits to work together in order to set things right and stop the villain. Even the smaller characters like Woolworth, the directing lizard, and the goat can stand out with their strong personalities. But then there is one more character I want to mention, but I'm warning you now that I'll be going into spoiler territory, so if you want to avoid that, then skip to here and you'll be fine for the rest of the review. But now with that said, let's talk about the Goody Bandit himself, Boingo. As a character, he's just an okay twist villain with some funny lines, but he gives the movie one thing that is more powerful than anything else that the characters could supply, and that's rewatchability value. Yes, it's fun to revisit the gang and the antics they get into, but one reason that makes Hoodwinked so fun to watch is to find out who is the Goody Bandit. And once you find out it's Boingo, the second watch becomes different as you notice all the subtle clues it places across the movie to indicate that the bunny is the villain. Like how he's a part of everyone's story, how he's been there when they face some big problems, and the most incriminating evidence, the fact that he's voiced by Andy Dick.
Oh, hi, Red. You've spoiled the surprise.
On top of being a clever update to the fairy tale characters to give their personalities more layers, they also have amazing actors whose performances made this already solid group become highly memorable and very likable. In regards to the characters, it's pretty clear to see why they helped make this movie so good. I often like to call this the best movie with the worst animation. It looks terrible, but the film itself is great nonetheless. Hoodwinked is a very enjoyable animated feature where, if you look past its visual quality, you'll find a clever comedy that can debatably be on par with the first two Shrek films. I won't deny that its stupidly low budget caused the animation to look bad, but when the movie does something right, it does so amazingly well with great writing that supplies an unconventional story that is engaging from beginning to end, lovably charismatic characters, phenomenal voice acting, and comedy that makes this one of the funniest animated films out there. I know the animation is very deceiving, but I highly recommend to check this movie out. It's a great choice if you're looking for a good laugh, but also something that's a little different than what you'd find in popular films like Shrek. Don't worry too much about the weak visuals. Everything else more than makes up for it to give you a good time. And if you had a good time with this review, then give this a like and come subscribe to my channel. I also recommend to check out my other Hoodwinked videos like the one about its history if you'd like to hear me talk more about this movie. Hoodwinked was always a fascinating case. Rather it be watching the film itself or looking into how it got made, it stands out from the other animated films by being an ugly movie that could deliver a beautiful experience. Hey guys, this is Animat, and I know it may not seem like it, considering that I didn't give it a big score, but honestly, I love Hoodwinked. And I mean, sure, I gotta do my job as a critic, and I do have to acknowledge the flaws of the movie and address my criticisms with them. But even at that, if it weren't for the animation, I would have easily given this the Animat seal of approval. It's one of those movies that I know that if I'm gonna go and watch it, I will have a great time, regardless of how many times that I've already seen it. But there is also one thing I do want to mention that I did not discuss about in the review itself of why is it that I love Hoodwinked. And I think the movie is a great representation of something that has not often been discussed about, and that is the fact that great animation doesn't always make a great movie, but a great script will always make a great movie. Because over the years that I've been doing this, like reviewing animated films and stuff like that, I have seen a whole bunch of them in which the animation is fantastic, that they could be innovative, that they could be beautiful, that the quality is put to the max onto the animation. But the scripts that they would go and provide, like with the story and the characters and all the other aspects, they just feel absolutely either mediocre or just flat out bad, and they would completely ruin the experience, and they make the animation feel meaningless. That's why there's a lot of these films in which they can have some very nice animation, but they don't feel like they make much of an impact because the soul of it is just not really there. It just feels meaningless in a way. That's why I honestly really oppose movies that really value style over substance. Like animated films especially that focuses so much on trying to be so stylized, that focuses on trying to really push to the max on its own style, but don't really do much to offer in terms of its script to actually make the characters, the story, and all those other elements feel meaningful. Like when they do, when they do those style over substance films, they honestly turn me off, and, I just push them aside and rather go and check something else that actually felt like would have more meaning. Now, in contrast to Hoodwinked, yes, the animation, it's pretty bad. And I mean, sure, it's understandable of its less than $8 million budget that they can only afford the most that they could with what they could go and make with the materials that they have. Like, that I understand, but it's the script that really makes the experience great. It's really the focus on all the other elements to go and have great voice acting, to make really memorable characters, to have a very engaging story. That's what makes Hoodwinked great. That's what makes Hoodwinked so fun to watch and a highly memorable experience that honestly, like I said before, would be on par with the first two Shrek films. It really is that awesome. And that's why I feel like it is very important for film, that's like a really good tip for all you aspiring filmmakers out there. Make sure that your script is top notch before you think about the visuals, regardless if it's like animation or live action. Like, don't think about the animation style or the cinematography just yet. Put that thing on the side and make sure that you have a very solid script. Make sure that thing can be the best that it can be. Make sure that your script is better than whatever visuals you may go and display. And that's when you know you got an amazing movie right there. Or any other project, like even if it's a short or a series or anything like that, make sure that your script is going to be better than whatever visuals you're going to go out and display. And Hoodwinked is a top example of that. All right, so now with that said, now that we are done with Hoodwinked, it is now time that we are going to go and move on to a Patreon request. And this time around, it is going to be from Matt Shoughton. So, if you would like to go and be like Matt, and you want to go and support my work and get a whole bunch of rewards, including but not limited to seeing my videos before anyone else, then all you have to do is go to patreon.com/animat. But at the same time, if you would like to suggest an animated film you would like me to review and that I would put onto the animation hat, then all you have to do is write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. All right, so now with that said, what is it that Matt went to go and suggest me to review? What is going to be the next movie I will be looking into? Well, coincidentally enough, this is a case that's very similar to Hoodwinked, where this is a movie that I've talked about just about everything about it except for the movie itself. Like, I've done everything else except for making a review of the actual movie, because I've talked about all the other aspects of it and all the other movies that are related to this film. I've already discussed about the history of it in Animation Look Back. I've already looked into the follow-ups of this film, including the sequel and the prequel. And I even did a review of the live-action remake, in which I will say, hot take, it is actually okay. I don't hate it as much as some of the other people do, and I do consider it to be one of the better live-action remakes. But now that I have looked into all of those elements, I've looked into all the other movies, and I've looked into the history and the making of the film, it is now time for me to do one more thing with it, which is to go and actually review the legendary original.
You've been hoodwinked, baby!